Is my channel about current events? Is it about comedy sketches? Is it about those years-old video when I didn't understand lighting yet? About Dungeons and Dragons? Yeah, this video is about tabletop RPGs. This serves as a content warning. I do have one in the chamber that is more of general interest, but this is something I've been thinking about. It's something I presented on this month, so I wanted to put this out here because I think I have something to contribute to this conversation. Now that you've been warned that this is content about tabletop RPGs, such as Dungeons and Dragons and its kin, let's get right into it by spoiling the Pathfinder 2 beginner box. You go into a dungeon, and in room 9, titled Gold Puzzle, you get this description. The door to this chamber silently glides open to reveal a long room. 2 stone statues of priests stand in the corners along one side of the room, facing a towering statue of a man holding out both of his hands, palms up. In front of this statue is a stone altar holding 9 golden coins. A voice booms out from the statue. "In my hands I judge the value of all wealth, raising up whichever is greater. One of these coins is a deception. Find it using only 2 judgments and receive my blessing." This is so artificial. Like, it's a logic puzzle and a reasonably fun one, but it was odd to me when I read it, because my thought with this, and whenever I see something like this in adventure, is why in the world was this installed? Who put the magic here to make this work, and why? For the longest time, I believed that I just hated it when puzzles did not have a narrative justification for their existence. I thought, like, oh, that's dumb, it ruins the immersion of the world. And while I would not consider myself a narrativist gamer, do I know how to put a link here? There'll be a link here or here if you want to talk about the triangle, which I think you should. I do not by any means consider myself a narrativist gamer, but I still like there to be a reason that the puzzle is there. Except then I was playing Sea of Stars. This is in the demo. This is in the free demo. But you walk in to a structure that makes no architectural sense, and there's a very artificial puzzle where you're putting different colored prisms in a light beam to change the color of the light. It has like one lateral thinking moment in it. When you walk in, one of the characters is like, "Whoa, the architecture of this place doesn't make any sense." And I thought, yeah, cool, they addressed it. Let's move on. Do I care if puzzles make sense? I don't know. Maybe I really am a gamist that just wants good puzzles who thinks he wants the puzzles to make sense. However, there is going to be someone in your snotty little D&D group who's like, "Oh, why is this puzzle here?" That person who's like me. So let's talk about how to make puzzles make sense and also be fun, because I find there is a dearth of information on this topic. Ultimately, what I want is I want me, and by extension you, to be able to procedurally generate puzzles that make sense and are fun for your players. So that's the goal of this video today. Let's go. I do want to talk briefly about the triangle and how it's going to interact with your players' motivations, and kind of how they're going to interact with your puzzles and what to expect. I don't believe really in pure gamists, narrativists, or simulationists, to be clear. I think everyone, to some extent, wants the game to be fun, wants the game to tell a good story, and wants the game world to make sense. However, if you've got gamist and narrativist, I exist like right here on the spectrum. I'm mostly a gamist, but obviously, as I said at the top of this video, I do want the puzzles to make sense. What you're going to see is your gamists mainly want the puzzle to be fun. They want it to be something that engages them in a way that they enjoy engaging with the game or the mechanics or you. The narratives, they want the puzzle to make sense. They want it to belong in the story and have a reason for existing. Simulationists also kind of want that, but primarily they want the rules of the puzzle to be consistent. We're not going to worry about simulationists, as always, but instead we're going to talk about sort of the gamist narrativist tension on your puzzle. Let's start by justifying why the puzzle exists at all. Like, why is this in the world in any sense? In reality, in the world that we now occupy, there are existing puzzles that occur organically. The ones I can think of are mainly to do with if you have a shared password and you want to remind others or yourself of a password, you make what could be called a puzzle to get to it. Could be looked at kind of as a puzzle, and anything to do with coding is kind of puzzling. Which is to say, it has a lot of the same interactions that you would expect when you're engaging with a puzzle, when you're doing coding. Also, it's puzzling. In our tabletop RPG world, and especially, I've been building a Pathfinder 2 campaign, so I'm thinking sort of high magic fantasy. Those kind of things do exist, but I came up with a list of 6 reasons why a puzzle might exist in the world. When I presented this, however, the people in the workshop came up with some other ideas that we could add to the list that I really like. And you're going to see that these interact, that they have categories and subcategories, and it gets all messy, which is just delicious, because if you're not making a mess when you're preparing for your TTRPG game, then what are you doing? We're going to go through the list quick, and then we will talk about how it actually will help you when you're building out your puzzles. First, rituals, or what you might call blend-in puzzles, which is, in reality, you'll see this with like secret clubs. Some religions will have things like this. Cultures will have this, where there's something they do that can involve like puzzling elements. The one I was thinking of is you have like the labyrinths, which barely count as a puzzle, but you'll see other things as well that could be called puzzles, and we need to be a little bit generous in how we term these. But rituals, or the ability to blend in with a culture, is one reason to have a puzzle in place. We also have corrupted data. This one is actually very easy to explain. So you have some elves, and they've got a little poem you need to recite to get through the door. They carved it in on a stone tablet. They did not intend this to be a puzzle when they made it. A couple centuries later, a dragon came by and broke the stone tablet with his tail. All the little stone pieces went flying, and now the characters have to run around finding them, gathering them, and kapow, you've got either a context puzzle when they have the missing pieces and need to fill it in using context clues, or you've got a puzzle that barely counts as a puzzle that they need to go find. Or I guess you could use actually a prop and they could literally build the tablet. That would be kind of cool. Something that's interesting about that is the players can go find all the pieces and put it together, thereby bypassing the puzzle. We'll talk more about the advantages there, because I think that is something to pay attention to. But for now, that's what I use to explain corrupted data as a puzzle type that'll occur in your world. Next, we've got nature. Nature is going to cause the sort of puzzles that you would solve in Minecraft or Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, where there's going to be a variety of solutions usually, but it's often how to get from point A to point B because this bridge got taken out or whatever. So that's nature-formed puzzles. It's just an act of nature has created a problem that the players need to solve. We have secret message. This is sort of encryption. You've got two people communicating with each other. They know there's a possibility that this might be intercepted, so they've in some way encrypted the data. The players have intercepted this, and they need to decrypt it. This is a close relative of corrupted data, but it's a different motivation. And right now we're talking about motivation. Then we have the one I mentioned before. We have password protection. The wizard needs to get through the door without triggering the fireball trap, and he has 3 other guys that he's trying to communicate the password to. So he leaves little clues in place to remind them what the password is. Boom, password protection puzzles. Nailed it. Then the last one on my list of 6 is hacking/divination, where if you're in a sci-fi setting or a setting where hacking makes sense, you could actually hand them a puzzle and say, this is how you hack into the machine. And I think at least one player at your table is going to love that. With divination spells, what you can say is this is the same thing. For this divination spell to break into this secured area, you need to solve this puzzle. Essentially fantasy hacking, if you will. There's one I almost put on the list, but I left it off because it's stupid. But I feel like you see this one enough that, look, maybe you'll make it work. Maybe you're an amazing GM, maybe you'll make it work. But the test puzzle. I only want a worthy person to take this magical sword, so I need someone who can beat my golem at tic-tac-toe. Like, that's they're testing the people. It's not quite the same as password sharing, because the puzzle was built with the intent of being solved by people who don't know the person who made the puzzle. I don't love this motivation, but it is one that I see sometimes in fantasy, so why not? Lost knowledge is another one. This is another way to express corrupted data, but the way the person in my workshop said it was that archaeology, for example, you're trying to uncover something or understand something without a Rosetta Stone. And so lost knowledge, it's a version of corrupted data, but I think it merits its own mention here, and also sort of illustrates how the motivations for making a puzzle do intersect with each other. Also, you can put whatever nonsense is in your setting that makes puzzles make sense. Here's the one thing I'm begging you. Do not do a mad wizard. Mad wizards are so boring as villains. If in your setting you've made magic that specifically drives people insane, and you've shown that it does this, and their insanity consistently makes them want to create puzzles, fine, you've earned it. But for the most part, Mad Wizard is a dumb motivation for anything. However, you could have a culture, the Fae in like Forgotten Realms and Golarion can kind of fill this role. You could have this culture of people who really enjoy puzzles and use them as entertainment value. and use them as a way to sort of communicate with each other artfully. And so those people will put together puzzles. Maybe you can hide some treasure behind one of them. It's not impossible. One that is related to the password one is a person in the workshop brought up CAPTCHAs. CAPTCHA is actually an interesting one because that is one where you don't know the people who are getting through the puzzle, but you're using it as a way to try and keep specific people or specific categories of people out of the treasure room or whatever. And so a CAPTCHA test is essentially, hey, I want you to prove that you're an elf like me or whatever. It doesn't have to be racism. Like all of D&D, it doesn't have to be racism. It just could be. Cool. Somewhat related to hacking is what I would call a break the machine puzzle, which like disarming a bomb could be looked at this kind of puzzle. Like there's a machine that was not intended to be stopped. This is where it breaks up a little bit with like password and CAPTCHA. Both of those are intended to be solved by the right person or the right sort of person. Whereas break the machine puzzles are, you have something that was not intended to be broken, but if you solve this puzzle, you can break it, such as bomb disposal. Also here, I think it bears mentioning that we've been talking about the motivation of the person who made the puzzle, and I do think that's important. I also want to put in a plug, however, for the motivation to solve the puzzle. I, in general, am opposed to puzzles hiding MacGuffins. If you must do that, right? If you must say that, no, they have to solve this puzzle to move on, what I would honestly recommend is do a puzzle format, and we'll get into formats in a minute. Do a puzzle format that can be pieced together entirely, so if the players choose, they can instead explore, find all the clues, and solve the puzzle that way. The thing is, being stuck behind a puzzle is going to quickly bring out all of your players' frustrations about puzzles. That's where you're going to hear like, oh, why was this here? Oh, this puzzle's stupid or unfair, or the things that, you hear in escape rooms. And I think that's a legitimate complaint from your players. Unless they, really want to be solving puzzles at your D&D table, there's a good chance that this is set dress. The three things that motivate people are spite. I don't know how you do a puzzle out of spite. You have someone telling them they can't do it, I guess. Or the two that I want you to focus on, greed and fear. I just punched myself in the mouth. That's how committed I am to this. Greed, obvious. Stick some treasure behind there. If they don't get it, the adventure continues. They're not like hitting this absolute dam. And then fear is the puzzle needs to give them either knowledge about some kind of threat they're going to deal with, or in fact subdue or somehow take away from that threat. So a very simple example is you've got a dragon. The dragon's going to kill the people in the town in 2 weeks. But in the meantime, here you've got this shrine that if you solve it, the dragon loses its extra scaly armor. Oh, and you've got this shrine that if you solve it, they're shrines like in Zelda. This shrine that if you solve it, the dragon will lose its ability to blow acid out of its mouth. I almost just stopped at blow acid, but that sounds weird. That seems like a drug reference. The dragon will stop blowing acid out of its mouth and start blowing acid, so it won't be in the right mindset to fight you when it gets here. So puzzles should address the player's greed or their fear, and if it doesn't do one of those things, it's just not going to be an engaging puzzle for them. I also strongly recommend that they can continue on the adventure without solving the puzzle, but hey, you do you. You know your players and I don't. But I know your mom. Now, as we get into the types of puzzles, I want to cite my sources, because as much as I want H. Bomber Guy to acknowledge me in any way, I don't want him to come after me as the new internet sheriff of plagiarism. So I will tell you that most of these puzzle types and the inspiration on how to create them all came from an amazing ebook I found called Puzzlecraft. I complained earlier that it was hard to find content on how to make compelling puzzles for your TTRPGs, which is why I'm making this video, and that's true. I stand by everything I said there. That is not what this ebook is. It is not focused on TTRPGs. It does not even mention them. It does mention puzzles in video games and in escape rooms. I did not find the advice in there to be the most useful part of the book, but the book itself was fantastic. It taught me about some puzzle formats that I'd never heard of before, and just be aware that a lot of what is coming here is inspired by or even directly taken from that book. I will link you to where you can buy the book. It is not an affiliated link. I get no kickbacks. I really recommend this book if you are interested in puzzles. I just finished recording that bit about Puzzlecraft, but the other thing I want to mention is this video gives you, it touches on maybe 1/3 of the content of that book. really, if you're interested in the topic, it will take you far more depth on the creation of these puzzles than I intend to. That's not the goal of this video. I want to give you the framework that you can stick them in your games and get them running. Puzzlecraft will really get into the nitty-gritty of how you can build up one of these puzzles from scratch, whereas in many of these cases, I'm going to recommend that you find one online and just use that at your table, because I'm creative like that. First, let's start with the general principle. With these puzzles, the ones that I tell you to go, like, download them, like, we'll look at, like, Sudokus and stuff like that, where it's stuff like, just go find one and use it if you know that it's solvable. But when there are puzzles that you're building from scratch, and there's a couple of these that you just have to, then you want to make sure that it's solvable. And the good way to do that is start with the solution. Like the solution that you want your players to walk away with, you must have that. And from there, sort of mutate backward through the puzzle steps to get the puzzle. In my research for this video, I watched a lot of videos from the Game Developer Conference, and one idea that stood out to me was this idea that you have these sort of moving pieces in your game, and then if you literally just spend time playing with them, you're going to discover interesting interactions between them, and you can use that to sort of pre-solve a puzzle by finding an interesting interaction that your players must then find. Now, that is great advice for video games where you can literally put the pieces in front of you and play with them. In TTRPGs, it's more limited in its applicability, but it's still pretty good advice, especially if you do have puzzles where you're like, I'll talk about tangrams later, where you cut up a shape and make it in other shapes. Like, there is stuff where you're sort of playing with your own pieces. I'm committing. Where playing with your own pieces will, in fact, help you come up with a fun puzzle that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. First, I want to talk about knowledge puzzles. This is a very interesting idea I got from a guy that I saw on YouTube who was a very big fan of the game Riven. Now, I have to admit I haven't played Riven, but his description of it was that you go learn about this culture that you've been embedded in, and then you use the things that you've learned to then solve the puzzles. I want to call that whole meta category knowledge puzzles, because they are puzzles not only by which you can test your players' knowledge of the setting, but you can make your players care about your setting, because they have to care about it if they want to get through the door to the treasure. This is an excellent way to convey your setting as opposed to just dumping it on them, because your players don't care. I've tried so hard. I really want my players to care about my setting, but they don't. They never will. But if I will give them a magical sword, if they can tell me who the previous king was and his tax policy, they care. So the first one of these that I want to talk about then is riddles. Riddles, the most basic way to look at them is to look at what Baggins and Gollum did when they were riddling each other in the dark. Oh man, my phrasing. Anyway, when they were riddling each other in the dark, Baggins and Gollum, yum yum, look it up. You have an object, and you want to have the other person guess the object, so you give them these clues. Baggins definitely did cheat. I agree with Gollum on that, with what's in my pocket. Insane. For this, you want to get an object, and the object itself should be interesting. This is a theme you're going to see in all the solutions. The solution not only should be related to a bribe or a threat, but it should also be compelling, like finding it out, especially in these knowledge puzzles or anything that has to do with your setting. It has to make your players go, whoa, that's so cool! We're going to take your object. In this case, it's going to be a magical sword that slew the dragon or whatever, and you're going to think about that object as if it were animate. This is advice from Puzzlecraft. You think about that object as if it were animate and its experience of the world, and how it would describe its experiences of the world, and write that out. Write out how this magical sword feels about the world. Then, to make it more puzzling, change its size, placement, or importance. Okay? And so if you imagine, well, if this sword was really tiny, or if it was extremely important to all the world, what then would it feel? How would it describe its experience? And then decorate from there, and you get yourself to a riddle. Boom! And then the players get a magic sword. Everyone wins. Next is context puzzles. I already described a context puzzle for you. It was that elven stone slate that got blown apart. Context puzzle is literally you write out a thing. It should be of meaningful length so they have something to work with, and then you just take pieces away until you give the minimum amount of information needed for them to decode it. This is where we have that advantage, though, is you can have 0 pieces of information and 100 pieces of the information scattered around. The advantage you have over every other puzzle format is that you are sitting at the table with the people trying to solve the puzzle. So not only can you have them go find all the pieces and basically bypass the puzzle, but you can also nudge them. Although I am so violently opposed to information clue checks off of intelligence rolls. I hate it. If you need to give them a clue, give them a clue. Put it in the world, have an NPC yell it at them, but I hate intelligence checks for clues. I hate them. Don't do them. Puzzlecraft names the next format Kevin Bacon puzzles because he's very well committed. This one would be tricky to get working in a fantasy setting like a homebrew one. I think you could get it in a well-established setting if your players are already kind of familiar, such as Forgotten Realms, Eberron, Galarian, you know, whatever. I think the best way to explain a Kevin Bacon puzzle is to put this example from Puzzlecraft on the screen. Essentially, you've got a chain of objects, and each one can be described as a part of something else. So here it's cities, and then countries or states or whatever. And here you see it ladder its way down to the solution that you want to draw the players to. This one, I admit, would be tricky to get going in a fantasy setting, but I think it's interesting. If it's a well-known one, if you're set in like Harry Potter or Middle-earth or maybe Forgotten Realms, maybe you can get away with it. The next one, I wouldn't actually put this in the knowledge puzzle category, although it is a good way to convey your setting, which is, say, a sequence puzzle is where you take a series of events, write them out, and then scramble their order, and the players have to reorder them. What you need to do here is you need to make sure there's a followable, a traceable cause and effect between the things happening. It shouldn't just be one thing. You should be following different threads to make it actually puzzling. But B cannot happen before A. And then in here you've got like 4 different mentions of things that all get placed in time before or after something else. Sequence puzzle is a great way to convey information to your players, to tell them a story about something that happened in your setting. Yeah, I think they're fantastic for that. They're also not too terribly hard, and it's another way to, as we talked about, make the players care. So, sequence puzzles, boom. Next, let's talk about observation puzzles that are going to test your players' ability to observe and synthesize and comprehend what they're observing. I only put 2 of these. There again, I want to state that in the book of Puzzlecraft, there's a lot more formats than what we're talking about here. This is just a sampler and also gives you enough variety that I think you could sustain several campaigns for. So the 2 I've got here are Mastermind. Do you remember the old board game Mastermind? Are you older than me? Younger than me? How old's Mastermind? Mastermind is significantly older than me, so I can't even say it's from my era. Anyway, I liked it. You put in the little colored pegs, and then the person gives you feedback on right peg, wrong location, right peg, right location, wrong. Gee, why does that sound familiar? Mastermind puzzles are fun. They're easy to do with your players. They involve high levels of interaction with you. Do it. Do a Mastermind puzzle. Then we do a Spot the Difference puzzle. You know what these are. Get a picture, modify it a little bit in some defined ways, and boom, throw it at your players. This is a great one because this is another way to kind of show them your setting. I suggest that the picture be something from your setting. So it could be actually a painting someone did in the setting, or it could be them trying to observe, like, you know, they've magically doctored this tableau to remove evidence or something like that. Like the Spot the Difference pictures has a lot of potential for storytelling. Jump into it. Use it, bro. Or sis, or non-binary pal. Next, let's talk about a puzzle that kind of defies category. Puzzlecraft calls it a manipulation puzzle. Sure, fair enough. You start with a phrase, and then you give a list of instructions on how to modify that phrase. Replace every R with a P. Replace the 3rd word and put it as the 6th word, and do that, a set of instructions, so that when they're done, they're looking at a completely new phrase that is the password or some big revelation or something like that. Puzzlecraft calls that a Simon Says puzzle. Sure, why not? Next are the puzzles that require props but aren't as difficult as you think. First is a cryptex. You've seen cryptexes in movies and probably other places. It's like a bicycle combination lock, and you have the letters on the dial and you need to roll them up so that they become the word that you're looking for. Here's the thing with the cryptex. First, you could literally use a bike lock and hand it to your players and like tape the letters on there. The way they recommend in Puzzlecraft is if you make columns of equal size, you put the letters in them and then tape them around. I would do like a rolling pin or a paper towel roll, like, you know, it can be anything like that, just so that they have free movement, and then your players can adjust them to be the secret word, which is fart. The second kind of prop puzzle is a tangram. That format comes to us from, I believe, China, where you take a shape, you cut it into smaller, distinct shapes, make sure they're easy to manipulate. I'd recommend laminating it if you can, and then hand it to the players as a jumble, and they need to remake the shape. They do need to know what the goal is for this to work. Maybe they don't. It would be significantly more difficult if they didn't know what shape they were trying to make, but if you made it blatantly obvious, like a square or a triangle, then that actually could be kind of interesting. Anyway, that's called a tangram. You do need a prop for that. I don't see a way to get around that. But yeah, there you go. Those are the prop puzzles. These next puzzles go into a category I'm naming cryptography. Did you see my water bottle apparate into existence? Yeah, that happened. The first one that I think will make more sense if I display it on the screen for you is called an anaquote, where you pick a compelling quote. Puzzlecraft recommends that for this you take a famous quote that the players will recognize. I don't think that's strictly necessary. Although if you did have it be a quote from your setting that they would recognize, that could be very cool. But I think it could also work very well as a revelatory quote, but that does significantly increase the difficulty of it, and it might lead to some aberrant results. So this is one where I would recommend, if you're making a unique quote that the players are not going to recognize, you need to scatter additional clues around to maybe help them out, maybe put in some of it for them, because you want to make that solvable. Yeah, this one requires testing. I'll test it on my table, and I will not report back because I don't see myself doing another video about this. Maybe, but really it's not likely. The main things I will say about anaquote, though, is use proper nouns and any weird fantasy words lightly, because the players solving it are not fantasy characters. They are people living in the 2020s who need to, call on their life experience to solve this puzzle. The next kind of cryptograph is an index. This is where you give them letters that might be gibberish, they might be other words, but then you simply give them a number that tells them what letter to draw from the word. Types of indexes that you've seen, there was the one that the evil cult used in Oblivion, where they used the first letter from each chapter. There's ones you could use like the last letter of each word. That's technically an index style of puzzle. Or you could even be like, you give them a sentence and then the index tells in this letter you pull out, in this word pull out letter 2, in this word pull out letter 5, in this word that's an index. If you give them all of the information of both, that's not as puzzling, but it would be, I think, satisfying for them to solve. It also becomes effectively a context puzzle. If you've scattered these pieces around, they might be able to fill in the blanks. So that's an index. A code is exactly what you think it is. I wouldn't recommend being a jerk like me and have symbols that represent entire syllables or even symbols that go with phonemes. But you could be a jerk like me if you want to. That is a remarkably challenging puzzle. But essentially what a code means is you replace each letter in the message with some other letter. Now, if this is like another letter of the alphabet, then you've made a letter-to-letter cipher. Some things I want you to think about. Caesar cipher is where you say you need to move this many letters in the alphabet for each one. You could also have one where it's like, vowels always move to vowels. If you want it to be sort of pronounceable, like in Final Fantasy X they did that. Riku's from Final Fantasy X, right? So it is Riku. Final Fantasy X had that where they would do vowel to vowel, and that became pronounceable. It's very impressive now that I'm realizing that game was written in Japanese. Whoever localized that game to English hit a home run on that. Amazing. You could also replace it with non-letter symbols. One puzzle I did that I had a lot of fun with is I took, the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition player handbook has alphabets from the various cultures. I took the Infernal alphabet, I did a letter-for-letter cipher on it, and with my players I very annoyingly told them, you have everything you need, and I kept, indicating toward the player handbook. That's a very meta way to solve a puzzle, but to be fair, the players are the ones solving the puzzle, not their characters. And that's just a concession we need to make. We just need to be okay with that, and I'm sorry. If you really want your character to solve the puzzle, roll an intelligence check and be boring and have no friends and go be in a cabin somewhere alone. I wish no ill on you. I hope you have plenty of food and comfort, but nobody wants to play D&D with you. Or maybe they do, but I don't. But I do. This was a useful rant. The point is, the players are the ones solving the puzzle, and so using stuff in their environment could be a fun little way to sort of step out of it, be meta, and using the stuff from the player handbook. Steal my trick. The languages from the player, the alphabets from the player handbook are great. Use them. One other thing I want you to consider, and I didn't think of this until I read Puzzlecraft. If you want your puzzle to increase in difficulty a bit, you can actually have multiple letters translate to the same other letter. So if you have both M and R become X, then that is meaningfully increasing the difficulty of your puzzle. But it is something you could consider. And that's one you want to check the solvability. In general, you want to check the solvability of all of your puzzles. Most GMs don't have the benefit of having a play tester. If you can send it to another GM you trust, can you solve this? That's ideal. If not, solve it yourself. Make sure the logical steps work. And if not, remember you're at the table with them, and you can pretend it was your plan all along for them to find another clue to the puzzle. Really, this is a huge advantage we have at tabletop RPGs, so use it. The next category is skills your players developed elsewhere. I'm going to go through a couple of these that you probably should home bake yourself. Hangman is one. Just play Hangman with them. Now, I wouldn't literally draw a 6 failure guy who shows up on the gallows. That would be kind of funny if it was like literally a guy, but he's dead after his head teleports. But I would have it be like, oh, there's the gem turns from green to a red hue, and it's clear to you that if it goes much farther, it's going to blow. That lets you also fudge. It doesn't have to be 6 failures. It could be 10 or 12. It lets you pick how many failures you want the players to be able to get. I would communicate to them that how many failures they get in one way or another. Don't draw, glasses and hat and gloves on the guy to make sure that they win. Like, the fail condition has to be acceptable and the adventure has to be able to move forward. I'm not going to get into that with much detail because I think that is stating the obvious. But yeah, play Hangman with them. Do it, baby. 20 questions. One of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite scenario in battle stations is when the science officer has to use yes/no questions to find out the password to get through a planetary shield. 20 questions, or just ask the GM yes/no questions. Fantastic. Fantastic. The players will have a lot of fun with it. Word searches. Just remember, a word search does not need to be shaped like a square. You can shape it like a dragon. Sudoku. Sudoku is so well known. I don't know. I'd feel weird doing it, but some player at the table is going to enjoy the Sudoku and have a good time with it. Hand them a Sudoku. When you check the answer, go quick. Nonograms. This is the app that my wife is in love with right now. You have the numbers on the side and you fill in the pixels there and it makes some picture. The picture needs to be a revelation at the end of the nonogram. It needs to be something fun that they're excited about. Minesweeper. If you preload the numbers on there for them, I wouldn't do a big one. I'd do like a 10 by 10, not much bigger. Put the numbers on there for them and make them solve your Minesweeper. Here's another one where you might accidentally make more than one correct solution. So if the players hand you one that is not your intended solution, but it still matches the numbers, party on. They solved it. Good job. This is another way we use the advantage of sitting at the table with the people who are doing the puzzle. Although the players will grouse at you if they notice there are 2 solutions, so try to avoid that. Literally draw them a maze. A maze is a fun one because this can sort of fit in as any level of abstraction, right? They can say, this is your characters moving through the dungeon or whatever, or it can be like the players, the characters themselves are literally solving the maze. It doesn't matter. Mazes are pretty versatile. You could draw your own. It's not that hard to draw a fun maze, but also just with this and any of the other ones I've mentioned in this category, download them from online. There's so much content here ready-made for you. Just fantasy it up and make it your own. Put in whatever information makes it compelling for the setting and go. Like, you should not have to work too hard on this unless you're hell-bent on making your own content. Board game puzzles. You know what I mean, so I won't get into it too much. Chess puzzles, Go puzzles, Othello puzzles. That one game that Pat Rothfuss made up, TAC? Is it called TAC? Yeah, that. Mashu. That's a Japanese style of pathing puzzle that's actually really interesting. I only want to mention it here because it is in Puzzlecraft. I looked into it. It looks like a really fun way to do path logic puzzles. So please look it up. This is how you spell it. It'll make a good puzzle. Your players will have fun. There's one that I didn't know what category to put it into, but it's what I call binary logic gates. It's where one of these guards can only tell lies and one of them can only tell the truth. What you do with that, don't do that puzzle, it's done. But instead, you have more rules. And so one example, this is kind of taken from Puzzlecraft. You have the laws of robotics, and then you've got different units who disobey different laws, and you need to identify which unit is which. If you have a set of rules that the NPCs need to obey, like they strictly need to obey them because they're golems or robots or they're under a gesh? A gesh? I think it's pronounced Gesh. Those can be a lot of fun. That's one where they're going to find ways to jack with it if they have access to these NPCs. They're going to kill them or they're going to torture them for information or whatever. Just do what you got to do. This one, the players are going to find some weird solution you didn't think of, and it's fine. Just run with it. And then finally, this doesn't really count as a puzzle itself, but this is the meta puzzle. This is the last thing you do in the escape room that proves you solved all the other puzzles. This is what I'm doing in my current campaign, and I'm very excited about it. When they solve a puzzle, they get an answer. That answer should itself be compelling in some way and lead them to something fun. Also, at the end of a longer adventure, make sure they still have access to those answers. You can say, haha, did you know that if you take the first letter of each answer, it spells out this word or whatever? That's called a meta puzzle, where several puzzles are used to solve the puzzle. Also, on a smaller scale, we've talked about it a little bit, like with the index, where if you have a puzzle where they need, for example, the index to pull the letter from, those could each come from a puzzle. So like you can take a puzzle and make it a meta puzzle by having other puzzles delivering the clues. I think this is a very cool idea. It's a fun way, especially if you want to do a puzzle-themed dungeon. Those are the formats. Let's talk about then the nitty-gritty and how to apply these. We're in the home stretch here. Thanks for hanging out with me. We have justifications for why people are putting puzzles in the world. We have motivations for why the players themselves want to solve the puzzles. And then we have the formats of puzzles, which again, this is an arbitrary list I took, a subset from the ones available in Puzzlecraft, but I think it's diverse enough to keep you busy and your players having fun for a long time. I will go ahead and put an image for this on the screen, but then I'll read it for your benefit so you can, play Dragon Quest on your Switch while listening to me, which is probably what I would be doing while watching this video. So with the ritual, the blend-in puzzles, really that can be any type of puzzle. It's a coming-of-age ceremony in this culture, or it's a way that they honor the god of wisdom or whatever. Any puzzle can be jammed into this context, and I think it works okay. Corrupted data, the puzzle formats that I think work pretty well for that are context, spot the difference, crypttext, tangram, anaquote, index, code, and sequence. In most of those cases, you have something that was whole and then burst apart. The only exception to that really is code, which just implies that the letters were there, but they've been corrupted over time or whatever. Again, any of these formats could go in any of these motivations, but these are the ones I came up with. So nature, I had a harder time with, but with nature, I think Minesweeper or Maze, or really the positional ones, I think Mashu might be able to work. You've definitely got some magical effects going on that's forcing them to, you have to turn at a black dot and you have to go straight through a white dot then turn. Magic is almost definitely involved in some of these, but if there's magic in your setting, by definition, nature has magic. So don't be too scared to have magical effects that are causing these things to happen. It's going to be artificial, but your players will go with it. You're all having fun. Secret message. So this is the two people who are communicating with each other and want to encrypt their message to one another's. They want to encrypt their messages to the whole group. The manipulation puzzle, the Simon Says puzzle, cryptex is definitely made on purpose by someone. Tangram, code, and context puzzles are all ways that could be secret message. Context puzzle is a little bit harder to justify because the secret message almost certainly wants to be received accurately, but I think you could make it work. Password protection. Riddle, context, Kevin Bacon, cryptex, hangman, anaquote, index, code. Password protection, honestly, anything that gives you a word as a result, or if your password is like a shape, you could use the path logic. Almost anything could justify password protection. Treasure hoards, and I want to restate, password doesn't have to be a literal password. You could say you have to draw this rune on the treasure hoard to get through, and then you have a path logic puzzle. Or the sequence, you need to recite the poem. It can be a variety of things. This is pretty flexible as a category. Hacking and divination, same thing. You can justify, this is how magic works. Magic is a fictional thing. I'm so sorry if I'm the one breaking that to you, but it is. You can say it works however you want. And so if this place is particularly well protected, so for your divination spell to work, in order to get this relevant or useful information, then you have to solve this mosh. I don't feel like a real YouTuber if I don't have a section named conclusion. So if you enjoyed this, please let me know. I love talking about tabletop RPG content almost as much as I love talking about weird videos and anything else. So yeah, I probably will do more tabletop RPG content regardless of what you want. But if there's something particularly interesting to you, let me know in the comments. And if it's interesting to me, I would love to make content on it. I don't know when I'll do more. Maybe soon, maybe later. I'm just going to do whatever sounds fun. What a great conclusion where I tell you I'm going to do whatever I want. Please tell me in the comments what you'd like to see. Let's talk. Let's have fun. Let's be friends. Concluded.